tax reform shouldn't be limited to the income tax. It should be across the board to all the taxes, because over the last 50 to 75 years, all taxes in the United States, virtually every one, has been shifted from corporations who used to pay a lot to individuals. And among individuals, it's been shifted from the top to the middle and the bottom. And to correct that, to reverse that, is easy and will raise more than enough money to do a whole host of things that the American people need and want and deserve. I'm only going to give you 4 simple examples to show what tax reform could be, to expand on what Ocasio-Cortez pointed out. Let's go. Number 1, the Social Security tax in this country. It already raises almost half the money that the federal government gets. In other words, the federal government gets roughly half from the income tax and roughly half from the Social Security tax, sometimes also called a payroll tax. Here's how the Social Security tax works. A certain percentage is taken out of your income for Social Security, and it is matched by money provided by the employer. But here's the rub. It's only the first $120,000, roughly, that gets this tax applied to it. So if you're a wealthy person, suppose you earn $200,000 a year, or $400,000 a year, or many millions a year, you don't pay the Social Security tax on all of it. You just pay on the first $120,000. Since that's way more than the vast majority of Americans get, here's the result. The vast majority of Americans pay a Social Security tax, but the richest Americans, most of their income is not subject to the Social Security tax. That's unreasonable. That's unnecessary. The Social Security tax, which is designed to give us a society in which people who've spent a lifetime of working are now retired and are decently able to live, that's something a civilized society does for itself. Everybody should pay their share of that. And if you applied the Social Security tax, the same rate everybody pays, to all of the income a person earns, then the wealthy would finally have to pay, and that would deliver billions of dollars in new revenue to the government for public services, and it would come from the pockets of those most able to afford it. Good idea on both counts. Let me give you a second example. Capital gains are taxed at a lower rate than labor income. That's right. If you work for an hour using your brains and muscles, you pay a higher tax on whatever you earn for your labor than if you got capital gains. What is capital gains? It's when you buy a share of stock for $5, hold it for a while, and sell it for $10. The difference between what you paid, $5, and what you get when you sell, $10, that's a capital gain. Now, you didn't have to work for that. You didn't have to do anything. You just had to have something called money to play this game. And the income you earn is taxed at a much lower rate than if you would worked. Now, there's no reason for that. That isn't fair. That isn't appropriate. The argument that only if you give the capital gains folks a break will they invest has been disproved all over the place, because we have many historical examples with higher capital gains tax and lower, and there's no relationship that we have to worry about here. And that would generate a huge amount of money. Let me give you the third example. We have a property tax in the United States. Cities and towns rely heavily on a property tax. That's a tax that measures the amount of property you have and then puts a tax on that property, not on your income, on what you own. But here's something you may not have understood. Property taxes apply to property in land, the value of the land you have, the value of a building you have, the value of the automobile you own, and the value perhaps of the inventory of your business. But here's the kind of property that isn't subject to a property tax. Stocks, bonds, cash. Wow. Wow. Now, here's an interesting fact that may help you understand this. The top 10% of shareholders own something on the order of 70 to 75% of the shares. By exempting what's called intangible property, property in stocks and bonds, from the property tax, you're exempting the richest people in the country from paying a tax. You're making the property tax apply only to the property the mass of people have: a car, a home, some land on which the home sits, and so on. So if you wanted to be fair, you would extend the property tax to all property. Suddenly, trillions in stocks and bonds would be considered property subject to tax, and that would bring in a revenue that is way larger than what we now have and enable governments to do all kinds of things. And the fourth example, and by the way, there are more, but the fourth example is the inheritance tax. Not that many years ago, you could leave the first $600,000 worth of wealth when you die to your heirs tax-free. They would only have to pay an inheritance tax on whatever was left to them when you die that was more than $600,000. You know what the limit is today? $11 million per person. So for a couple, leaving, say, their wealth to the children, 2 times 11, $22 million can be left with no tax attached to it. You know, the United States was once a country where the idea, at least the majority idea, was we should all start equally, have an equal chance in life, so that our well-being depends on how hard we work, how talented we may be, etc. We didn't like the idea that some people would start with a silver spoon in their mouth and other people with not enough to eat. We thought that was unfair, that two babies with no responsibility either way should start with such an unequal chance in life. And an income tax equals it if you apply it to inheritance. Inherited wealth should pay a tax. We once did that in the United States. We don't do that anymore. We could go back to what we did, generating enormous income from the government. And from who? From only the very wealthiest, who leave, say, more than $1 million or more than $500,000 to their kids. Give them that advantage if that's so important. But $22 million per couple is extraordinary. So Ocasio-Cortez was right more than she said. Tax reform can and should be done across the board, wherever taxes are unfair, discriminatory, because they're always unfair and discriminatory in one particular way. The more you have, the more the tax system has been manipulated and changed over several decades, at least since the Second World War, to favor those at the top at the expense of everybody else.